subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please do it now before we start, because what I am about to tell you will stay with you for the rest of your life. And write in the comments from which city you're listening or watching, because I want to know how far this story will travel. I never thought I would adopt a child. I was already in my late 40s, living alone in my small creaking house at the end of Willow Street. The kind of house people passed without noticing. My own children were grown and gone, living their lives far from me. The silence in my home had become heavy, like a blanket pressed over my face at night. Then one autumn afternoon, when the air smelled faintly of burning leaves and the sky was a cold shade of gray, I got a phone call from an old acquaintance who worked for child services. She said there was a boy, 8 years old, who needed a temporary home. His name was Elias. No other relatives would take him, and the foster homes nearby were full. I didn't think. I just said yes. The first time I saw Elias, he was sitting in the back seat of a government car, clutching a small duffel bag with both hands. His eyes. I'll never forget them. They were dark, almost black, but not empty. They had a strange flicker inside, like he was looking at something far beyond the room, or maybe inside it, something no one else could see. "Hello, Elias," I said gently. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, like he was trying to memorize my face. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, because you'll want to hear how quickly my quiet, predictable life turned into something I still struggle to explain. The first week was normal, at least on the surface. I made him meals, showed him where the bathroom was, and tucked him into the small guest room every night. But I began to notice little things. At breakfast, he would pause in the middle of chewing, tilt his head as if listening to something, then continue like nothing had happened. Sometimes I'd find him standing at the window, whispering to someone who wasn't there. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I thought maybe Elias needed water or had a nightmare, but when I stepped out, he was just standing there in the dark, facing the wall. "Elias?" I whispered. "They're louder here," he said, without turning around. I froze. "Who's louder?" He turned his head slightly, enough for me to see his profile in the moonlight, the ones that talk at night. Write in the comments from which city you're listening or watching. Have you ever heard a child say something that made your stomach drop? I thought maybe he was just dreaming, or he'd overheard something on TV. But then things escalated. The drawings started appearing. Elias wasn't much of a talker, but he loved to draw. At first, it was harmless. Trees, houses, the occasional dog. But then he began to sketch these figures. Tall, thin silhouettes with faces that were too long, eyes that were nothing but dark ovals. And in every drawing, the figures stood close to him, sometimes with their hands on his shoulders. When I asked about them, he said, "They follow me, but they like you too." That night, I locked my bedroom door. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, because what happened next will make you question every shadow in your house. It was around midnight when I heard the scratching. It came from Elias's room. At first I thought it was him tossing in bed, but then the sound became rhythmic, like nails dragging slowly across wood. I went to check on him, and my heart almost stopped. He was kneeling on the floor, using a pencil to draw on the wooden boards. Huge, sprawling lines and symbols I didn't recognize. "Elias, stop!" I snapped, pulling him away. He looked at me, not startled at all. "They said it would keep you safe," he murmured. I scrubbed the markings off the floor the next morning, but I couldn't scrub the unease out of my mind. A few days later, I caught him talking to the closet, not in a playful way, in a low, deliberate voice, like he was receiving instructions. When he noticed me, he smiled in a way I can't describe. It wasn't a child's smile, like, write in the comments from which city you're listening or watching. Do you believe children can see things adults can't? By the third week, I started hearing the voices too. Faint at first, like a radio left on in another room. I'd find myself straining to make out the words, my skin prickling when I realized they were coming from empty corners. Elias seemed calmer when I mentioned it, almost relieved. They just wanted you to hear them, he said. Now they know you're not like the others. I should have called someone. I should have told child services I couldn't handle him. But instead, I felt something else. Curiosity. One night, he came into my room and said, "They want to show you." Before I could ask what he meant, he took my hand and led me to the basement. The air grew colder with every step. He pointed to the far wall where the cement was cracked. "Here," he whispered. And then I heard it clearly. A voice from inside the wall, soft and urgent, saying my name. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, because in the next part, you'll learn what was behind that wall, and why I wish I had never agreed to take him in. I knelt down, pressing my ear to the cold, cracked cement. The voice was clearer now, a woman's voice, trembling, almost pleading. "Let me out," it whispered. I jerked back, my heart hammering in my chest. "Elias, who is that?" He crouched beside me, his small hand resting lightly on the crack. "She's one of them," he said calmly, like he was explaining something obvious. "But she's stuck. They said you can help." Like, write in the comments from which city you're listening or watching. Because if this happened in your home, would you run or would you listen? I should have left. I should have taken Elias and gone upstairs, locked the basement door, called someone. But instead, I touched the wall again. The cement was ice cold, colder than the winter wind outside, and the longer my hand stayed there, the more I felt a faint vibration, like a slow heartbeat. The woman's voice came again. "It's so dark here. You can open it." Elias was watching me closely. "They chose you," he said. "Not me. I'm just the bridge." "The bridge to what?" I asked, my throat tight. "To them. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Because what I saw next still follows me into my dreams. And maybe it will follow you too." The crack widened. I swear I didn't touch it. But the lines in the cement spread like veins, dust falling softly to the floor. Through the gap, I saw something move. Not a person exactly, but a shape that shifted as if made of smoke. Two glistening points, like wet eyes, stared out at me. The woman's voice was gone. Instead, a low hum filled the basement, vibrating through my bones. Elias leaned closer, whispering something in a language I didn't understand. The shadow moved again, pressing against the wall, and I felt a sudden pressure in my skull, like my thoughts weren't entirely my own anymore. I pulled back, gasping. "Elias, what is that?" His expression didn't change. They're friends. They've been waiting for someone to trust, someone who won't be afraid. "I am afraid," I snapped, my voice cracking. "They know," he said simply. "That's why they keep showing you more." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the hum in my chest, the cold of the cement under my palm, the pull of something ancient and patient on the other side. Elias slept soundly, his face peaceful in a way it never was during the day. Over the next week, the voices followed me upstairs. I'd hear them in the kitchen, the living room, even outside when I went to get the mail. They were clearer now, almost conversational, asking me questions in whispers only I could hear. Do you remember us? Why did you close the door? Will you help us again? Write in the comments from which city you're listening or watching, because I need to know if anyone else has heard something like this, if anyone else has felt this pull. I stopped inviting anyone over. Not that I had many friends left to invite. The few neighbors who waved from the street seemed different, like their eyes lingered on my house too long. And Elias, he was thriving. He ate more, laughed more, even started calling me Grandma without hesitation. But I could see it in his gaze. He knew more than he told me. One night, I woke to the sound of my front door opening. Quiet, deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept downstairs, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The door was ajar, letting in the chill autumn air. Elias stood on the porch, barefoot, wearing only his pajamas. He was staring into the darkness beyond the yard. "What are you doing?" I hissed, grabbing his arm. "They're calling," he said, not looking at me. "They said tonight is different. Tonight you'll see." I tried to pull him inside, but then, from the tree line at the edge of my property, something stepped forward. Tall, thin, its movements jerky and wrong, like a puppet with too many strings. Its head tilted unnaturally far to the side as if studying us. I froze. Elias didn't move. "They're here for you," he whispered. "Subscribe to the YouTube channel." Because when that thing opened its mouth, I swear I heard my own voice coming out. It spoke my name, and then it said, "It's time." I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to run, to pull Elias back into the house, to lock every door and never open them again. But my body stayed rooted, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. The thing in the tree line took one slow, deliberate step forward. Its limbs were too long, the joints bending in ways they shouldn't. In the pale light spilling from the doorway, I could see its skin was stretched tight over its bones, translucent in places, and its mouth, my mouth, was still forming words I hadn't spoken. "Come back," it said in my own voice. "You left us once. You won't again." Elias turned to me with a faint smile, as if this moment was exactly what he'd been waiting for. "They've been patient," he said, "but they're tired of waiting." Before I could answer, a second figure emerged from the shadows behind the first. This one was shorter, hunched, its head wrapped in what looked like strips of cloth that fluttered, even though there was no wind. I heard whispers spilling from it, a dozen voices overlapping, each one urgent and close to my ear, though it never moved its mouth. I stumbled backward, my grip tightening on Elias's arm. "Inside?" I said, my voice shaking. He didn't resist, but he didn't look afraid either. He let me pull him into the house, and I slammed the door, locking it twice. I shut the curtains, turned on every light. The night felt like it was pressing against the glass, the weight of it seeping into the walls. But the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, surrounding the house, moving from room to room as if they were inside already. Elias sat calmly at the kitchen table, swinging his legs like a child waiting for dessert. "They're closer than you think," he said. "The walls don't keep them out. They never did." I grabbed the phone to call someone, anyone, but the line was dead, not even a dial tone. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, like a freshly dug grave. That's when the knocking started. Soft at first, from the front door, then from the back, then from the walls themselves. The sound wasn't frantic, it was patient, almost polite. Tap, 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 as if asking for permission to come in. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound traveled through my bones. Elias stood up, walked to the hallway, and placed his palm against the wallpaper. The knocking stopped. "They want to make sure you're ready," he said over his shoulder. "For what?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He turned, his face unreadable, to see them properly. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room chair with the lights on, staring at Elias's closed bedroom door. At some point, the hum returned, that deep, vibrating sound I'd first heard in the basement. It was inside me now, in my ribs, in my teeth, as though the house itself was resonating with it. By morning, Elias was gone. His bed was neatly made, his shoes by the door. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the yard, nothing. I searched every room, every closet, the basement, but he had vanished. The only thing I found was a drawing left on the kitchen table. It was of me, standing in front of the cracked basement wall, with those tall, thin figures behind me. Only in the drawing, I wasn't afraid. I was smiling. And in the corner, scrawled in a child's handwriting, were 3 words: "You're the bridge." I stared at that piece of paper until my vision blurred. My first instinct was to crumple it, throw it away, maybe even burn it. But something in me couldn't do it. My fingers trembled as I traced the lines of my own drawn face, the curve of the smile that felt nothing like me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd smiled like that. I sat there for hours, waiting for some sound from outside, some knock, a whisper, the sound of Elias's feet on the porch. But the house was so still that every tick of the clock seemed deafening. The hum had faded sometime around dawn, leaving behind an emptiness that made me feel abandoned. I should have called the police. I should have reported a missing child. But the thought of strangers coming into my home, walking through my rooms, touching the walls, it filled me with a kind of dread I didn't understand. Somewhere deep down, I already knew they wouldn't find him. Not here. Not anywhere they could search. By afternoon, the silence had become unbearable. I went down to the basement, though my stomach twisted with every step. The crack in the wall was still there, jagged and wrong, like a scar that hadn't healed. I knelt down and pressed my hand against it. It was warm this time. A voice slipped through, softer than before, but it was not the woman's voice I had heard that first night. This one was deeper, smoother. It almost felt like it was speaking inside my skull instead of through my ears. "Almost ready," it murmured. I yanked my hand back, stumbling so hard I almost fell. My heart thudded in my chest, and I backed away until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. I kept staring at that crack, waiting for something to push through, for those glistening eyes to appear again. But nothing happened. That night, the dreams began. I was standing in a field under a sky that wasn't quite right, too many stars, all in unfamiliar constellations. The ground was soft and damp, and far in the distance I could see Elias, walking hand in hand with one of the tall, thin figures from his drawings. He looked over his shoulder at me, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear the words. When I tried to run to him, the field stretched longer, the stars above shifting as if the sky itself was watching me. I woke with the taste of dirt in my mouth. Over the next few days, the house began to change in ways I couldn't explain. The light seemed different, as though it was passing through something before reaching me. Shadows stayed a moment too long after I moved. The air carried a faint hum that I couldn't unhear, like the echo of a note struck on a massive instrument, vibrating endlessly in the background. Then came the messages. They weren't on paper, but in other places, etched faintly into the condensation on the bathroom mirror after a shower. spelled out in crumbs on the kitchen counter, even in the patterns of dust on the floorboards. Always the same words, open it. I started locking the basement door, but sometimes I'd find it ajar in the morning, the crack in the wall wider than before. The cement was crumbling now, revealing something darker beneath, something that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. One evening, I heard the front door creak open. My breath caught, and I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, an old brass candlestick, and stepped into the hallway. Elias was standing there. He looked exactly as he had the night he disappeared. Same pajamas, same bare feet, not a speck of dirt on him. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his eyes. They were darker now, so dark that the pupils and irises blended into one. "You've been waiting," he said. I swallowed hard. "Where have you been?" "With them," he replied simply. "Time is different there." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already walking past me, heading straight for the basement door. My hands shook as I followed him, my voice cracking. "Elias, stop. Tell me what's happening." He didn't turn around. "You'll understand soon. They're ready for you now." He opened the basement door, and that cold, vibrating air rushed up the stairs, wrapping around me like invisible hands. I felt my body move forward, step by step, even though my mind screamed at me to stop. At the bottom, the crack in the wall was no longer a crack. It was an opening, wide enough for a person to step through. Beyond it was nothing but blackness, not darkness like a room without light, but the kind that seemed alive, shifting and pulling at the edges of my vision. Elias stepped inside first. His figure was quickly swallowed by the black, though I could still hear his voice. "Come on, Grandma. You don't want to miss this." My hands were trembling so badly I thought I might drop the candlestick, but I didn't step back. That blackness. It wasn't just calling me, it was pulling. My feet slid forward, my body leaning into it. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that if I crossed that threshold, I wouldn't come back. And yet, I took another step. The hum grew louder, filling my skull until I could feel it in my teeth. Shadows moved inside the blackness, shapes just beyond recognition. Whispers curled around me, speaking my name in voices I half remembered from my childhood, my dreams, my fears. "Just one more step," Elias's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. I stood on the edge, my toes almost touching that living dark, my breath shallow. Behind me, the basement felt impossibly far away. And then something reached out. Not a hand, not anything human, but it touched me all the same. It wasn't skin that met my skin. It was something colder than any winter I'd known. Yet it burned, searing through my palm and shooting up my arm like liquid frost. My breath caught. My knees buckled. And in that instant, I understood that the thing touching me wasn't just holding my hand. It was inside me. Memories that weren't mine began to flood my head. I saw landscapes under alien skies, seas that moved without wind, forests where the trees pulsed like beating hearts. I saw faces, thousands of them, bending and twisting, their mouths forming words I didn't understand. And through it all, I felt an overwhelming sense of hunger. Not for food, not for anything physical, but for something deeper, something alive. The pull grew stronger. My heart raced so violently I thought my ribs would crack. I wanted to step back, to scream, to fight, but my feet moved forward into that blackness, as if I had been walking there my entire life and only now remembered the path. The air, if it was even air, was thicker on the other side. My lungs strained with every breath, but there was a strange sweetness to it, a scent like damp earth mixed with something metallic. Shapes shifted around me, never fully forming, always melting into the dark before I could define them. But the eyes were constant, pairs of them, hundreds, watching from every direction. Somewhere ahead, Elias's small figure emerged again, his silhouette stark against the nothingness. His voice was calm, steady, like a guide leading me down an unlit road. "You can see them now," he said. "I don't want to," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They've been with you since before you were born," he replied. "They've been with all of us. But most people keep their eyes shut." One of the shapes moved closer, resolving, just for a moment, into something almost human. Its body was impossibly thin, its head elongated, its mouth wide enough to stretch across where its cheeks should have been. When it smiled, it showed no teeth, only darkness. I took a step back, but my heel met nothing. It was as if the ground itself was receding, forcing me forward. The hum was everywhere now, inside and out, a vibration that seemed to sync with my pulse until I couldn't tell if my heart was beating on its own or if it was being commanded. "They want to show you where I've been," Elias said. "But first, they need to finish what they started with you a long time ago." My throat tightened. What did they start? His head tilted slightly, the way it had that first night I met him. "The bridge." Before I could ask, the ground beneath me shifted. It felt like stepping into water that was somehow solid, each foot sinking without resistance. The shapes around me grew taller, their outlines sharper, and I realized with a sick jolt that they were moving in perfect unison. Every tilt of the head, every shift of a limb mirrored exactly by the others. Then they began to speak. Not with voices I could hear, but directly into my head, a layered chorus that made my vision blur. "You opened the door. You heard us. You will carry us back." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm not." The cold burned hotter, spreading from my arm into my chest. My body stiffened, my knees locking. Elias stepped closer, his dark eyes reflecting nothing. "You already said yes, Grandma. You just don't remember." The blackness behind him rippled like water, and for the first time I saw through it, to the basement wall on the other side. I could see my house, dim and still, as if it was waiting for me to return. "You can go back," Elias said. "But you won't be alone anymore. You'll never be alone again." The chorus swelled in my skull, and I realized with growing horror that I could feel their shapes moving inside my thoughts, pressing into the spaces where my own memories lived. I could feel them learning me, every secret, every fear, every small, private thing I had kept locked away. The humming became a single, sustained note so loud that the air seemed to shake. The shapes drew closer, and their eyes burned brighter. Elias reached out his hand. "This is the last step," he said. I hesitated, my breath shallow, my body trembling so violently it felt like I might shatter. Behind me, the blackness shifted again, and for just a second, I thought I saw another version of myself, standing perfectly still, smiling that strange, unfamiliar smile from Elias's drawing. The ground tilted forward beneath my feet. I was falling, not down, not up, but through. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my kitchen. It was morning. The table was set for 2. Steam curled from a cup of tea I didn't remember making, and across from me, Elias sat, swinging his legs, a faint smile on his face. "They'll be quiet for now," he said, "but they're here. They'll always be here." The hum was softer, but it hadn't left. It was under the floor, behind the walls, in the spaces between my thoughts. And when I looked toward the hallway, I could see faint shadows, where there shouldn't be any, moving in slow, deliberate ways. waiting. I didn't ask where he had been. I didn't ask when they would come again. I already knew. For the rest of that day, I moved through the house as though it weren't mine anymore. Every familiar object, the worn couch, the family photographs, the teacups I'd owned for decades, felt different, heavier, as if they'd been handled by unseen hands in my absence. The air had a weight to it, too, a stillness that wasn't the same as silence. Elias followed me from room to room without saying much, his bare feet making no sound on the floorboards. Sometimes I'd catch him glancing at corners of the ceiling or at the spaces between the furniture, as though he was checking on something only he could see. When I asked him what he was looking at, he'd just smile faintly and say, "They like it here." That night I tried to sleep, but the hum wouldn't let me. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It simply sat there under my heartbeat, a low, steady vibration that made my teeth ache if I stayed still too long. I turned over again and again, clutching the blanket tighter, listening to the house. At some point after midnight, I realized I wasn't alone in my room. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear the door. But there was a shadow standing at the foot of my bed, taller than any person I'd ever met, its outline stretching up to the ceiling. Its edges wavered as though it was breathing, and the air round it was colder than the rest of the room. My first instinct was to scream, but the hum surged, and with it came a sudden, crushing calm. My body relaxed against my will, my fingers unclenching from the blanket. The shadow didn't move closer. It just watched. "They're checking on you." Elias's voice came softly from the doorway. He was just a silhouette in the dim hall light. "They want to see if you're ready." I forced my voice out through a dry throat. "Ready for what?" He stepped into the room, his small frame cutting through the dark. "To carry them." I shook my head, my pulse quickening again despite the hum. "No, I can't." "You already are," he interrupted. "That's why they chose you." The shadow began to recede, melting back into the darkness until only the empty space at the foot of my bed remained. But the cold stayed. Elias turned and walked away, and I heard his quiet steps fade down the hall. When I finally dared to move, I reached for the lamp on my nightstand and switched it on. The room looked normal. My things were in place, the curtains closed, the clock ticking steadily. And yet, I knew the shadow hadn't been a dream. The next morning, I found something new in the kitchen. On the window above the sink, drawn faintly into the condensation from the early autumn chill, were words. "Almost time." Elias didn't react when I pointed it out. He just sipped his tea and said, "They're patient, but not forever." In the days that followed, little changes began to creep into my life. Sometimes I'd hear my name whispered from another room. Other times, I'd catch glimpses of movement in mirrors, a flicker of a figure that wasn't there when I turned. The hum had settled deeper now, not just in my ears, but in my bones, making my hands tremble if I tried to ignore it. The worst was when I began dreaming their dreams. I'd wake with visions of vast, endless halls filled with towering figures, all standing in perfect stillness. In those dreams, I always knew they were waiting for me to walk among them, to take my place. Elias was always there too, somewhere in the dream, watching, guiding, smiling. One evening, as the sun set and the long shadows filled the living room, Elias stood by the front door and said, "It's soon." I didn't ask what he meant. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew, and worse. Part of me had stopped wanting to resist. That night, the air felt different, denser, as though the walls of the house had shifted closer together, sealing me in. Every sound seemed amplified. The the creak of the floorboards under my feet, the sigh of wind against the eaves, the slow ticking of the clock on the mantel. But beneath it all, the hum was louder than ever. No longer just under my heartbeat, but matching it, directing it. Elias sat cross-legged on the living room rug, facing the darkened window. He wasn't playing, wasn't reading. He was simply staring into the glass, as if the night outside held something only he could see. I almost asked him what he was looking at, but before the words could leave my mouth, he said, without turning his head, "They're closer." The glass trembled, just barely, but I saw it. A soft, almost imperceptible vibration that spread from the center outward, like something pressing against it from the other side. I stepped toward him. "Elias." "What happens when they get here?" "They're already here," he said quietly. "They just want you to open the last door." That phrase, "last door," settled heavy in my chest. I didn't ask where it was. I think I already knew. When I went to bed, I didn't bother locking my door. Some part of me understood it wouldn't matter. Sleep came in fractured bursts, each one pulling me into dreams that felt less like dreams and more like visits. The halls again, those endless, cold corridors lined with unmoving figures. But tonight they weren't still. Their heads turned as I passed, following me with unblinking eyes. Elias was at the end of the hall, standing before a massive door of black stone. It pulsed faintly, as if it had veins. He placed his small hand against it and looked at me. "When this opens, you'll see everything." I woke with the taste of iron on my tongue. The hum was in the room with me, pulsing against the walls, under the floor, in the air. By the time I reached the kitchen, Elias was already dressed, standing by the basement door. "It's tonight," he said, his voice calm, certain. The door was open, the light at the top of the basement stairs flickering like it did on the night I first heard the voice in the wall. I should have turned away, but my legs carried me forward, following him down into the cold. The crack in the cement was gone now. In its place was a gaping void, blacker than any shadow, its edges rimmed with a faint, unnatural glow. The hum poured from it like heat from a furnace, wrapping around my body until my breath came shallow and quick. "They're waiting for you," Elias said. "All you have to do is step through." Shapes moved within the void, tall, deliberate, their movements too smooth, too perfect. Eyes caught the dim light, glimmering like wet stones. And then the voices began, a chorus threading directly into my mind. "You opened the first door. You heard us. Now you are ours." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I took one step forward. The glow intensified. Elias reached for my hand, his grip firm, steady. "You'll never have to be alone again," he whispered. And as the darkness began to swallow us both, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The blackness folded over me like liquid silk, cool at first, then warming in a way that made my skin prickle. My vision blurred, but not from darkness. It was as if my eyes were seeing too much at once. The shapes in front of me elongated and split, twisting into impossible angles, yet every movement felt deliberate, meaningful, like a language I'd never learned but somehow understood. The hum was no longer outside me. It had settled deep within my chest, thrumming in time with my heartbeat, guiding it, regulating it. My breathing slowed until each inhale felt like it pulled the void deeper inside me. Elias walked ahead without hesitation, his small frame cutting through the shifting dark as though he belonged to it. I followed, my steps soundless. The ground, if it was ground, seemed to move with me, a surface that was neither solid nor fluid, adjusting itself so that I never stumbled. We passed through a space that widened suddenly into what felt like an endless cavern. Above us, there was no ceiling, only a vast expanse of pulsing lightless matter. And in it, hundreds, no, thousands of those tall figures stood in perfect silence. Each had a different shape, some lean and skeletal, others massive and hunched, but all shared those same glistening eyes. When their heads turned toward me, it wasn't in unison, but it wasn't random either. It felt choreographed, as though each one had been waiting for the exact second my gaze would fall on them. A voice, not Elias's, filled the space around me. The bridges open. My knees weakened, but the hum steadied me. My fear, once sharp, now felt dull, blunted by something that wasn't entirely my own will. "They've been preparing you," Elias said, glancing back at me. His eyes reflected nothing, not even the faint glow edging the void. "You've been hearing them your whole life. You just didn't know what it was." I tried to speak, but the air thickened in my throat, holding the words down. One of the taller shapes approached, its steps silent, its form bending slightly forward to meet my eye level. The air round it was cold enough to sting. Its voice wasn't a sound, it was a thought pressed directly into my mind. "We will walk with you. We will see through you. And you will never close the door again." Images flashed in my head, my own house, my street, the neighbors I'd waved to for years. But in each vision, there were shadows behind them, just out of sight, always watching. I realized then that never alone didn't mean comfort. It meant occupation. Elias reached out, his fingers curling around mine, and the moment our skin touched, the cavern dissolved. The figures didn't fade. They folded into the air, into the shadows, into me. When the world reformed, I was standing at the top of my basement stairs. The door to the void was gone. The wall was unbroken, the light no longer flickered, but I could still feel them, in the floor under my feet, in the space behind me, in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Elias stood at the bottom of the stairs, smiling faintly. "It's done," he said. "We're home." And in the silence that followed, I realized the hum was gone. Not because it had stopped, but because it had become part of me. For days afterward, I lived in a strange, disorienting quiet. It wasn't the quiet of absence, not the gentle hush of an empty house, but the kind that follows a sharp noise when your ears are still ringing and the world feels muffled. I went about my routine, or at least some fractured version of it, moving from room to room, as if I were trying to remember how to inhabit my own life. But the truth was, I wasn't alone in any of those rooms. I could feel them, always. They didn't speak to me the way they had in the void. There were no layered choruses, no direct words pressed into my skull. Now it was different, more subtle, more insidious. A flicker at the edge of my vision that made me turn my head. A faint pressure on my shoulder, like the weight of an unseen hand. The sensation that the air itself was leaning in to listen when I breathed. The first night after coming back, I tried to tell myself it was over. The crack in the wall was gone, the basement was just a basement again, and Elias. Well, Elias was still here, but he seemed quieter, almost subdued. He followed me less, spoke only when necessary, and spent hours sitting cross-legged in the living room, staring at nothing. Yet, when I walked past him, I could feel the shift in the air, the way the hum inside me responded to him, like two notes resonating in harmony. On the third night, I woke to find Elias standing in my bedroom doorway. I didn't hear him come in. I didn't hear my door open. He was simply there, framed in the faint orange glow from the street light outside. "They want you to see," he said, his voice soft but steady. I pushed myself up in bed. See what? His eyes glimmered in the dim light. Everything. Before I could ask more, the room changed. It didn't dissolve the way the basement had. It folded. Corners shifted, the ceiling drew upward into darkness, and the walls stretched until the familiar shape of my bedroom was gone. We were somewhere else entirely. It wasn't the void. This place was brighter, but the light wasn't sunlight or lamplight. It was diffused, directionless, seeming to come from the air itself. The ground beneath my feet was smooth and pale, almost like marble, but warm to the touch. And rising up around us were those towering figures again, though now I could see them clearly. Their forms weren't fixed. They rippled like heat mirages, shifting from solid to translucent in the blink of an eye. Faces would appear and disappear in their surfaces. Human faces, animal faces, things I didn't recognize at all. Some seemed old and worn, like relics of long-forgotten lives. They moved slowly, with a grace that was almost hypnotic, and every motion sent a ripple through the air, as if reality itself adjusted for them. One of them stepped closer. Its eyes locked on mine, and the hum inside me surged until I could feel it in my teeth, my fingertips, my spine. I couldn't look away. A voice bloomed in my mind, but this time it wasn't many voices. It was one. We have always been here. Images slammed into me, not memories, not exactly, but moments from a world that wasn't mine. Cities of glass that floated on black oceans, skies that pulsed like a living organism, people, or things like people, moving in and out of shadows that swallowed them whole. The figure reached out, and though it never touched me, I felt something slip deeper into me, threading itself into my thoughts like roots into soil. I gasped, clutching at my chest. What? What are you doing? The voice answered simply, anchoring. I turned to Elias, panic rising in my throat. I don't want this. His expression didn't change. It's too late, Grandma. You're already part of them. You always were. Before I could respond, the figures began to move in closer, forming a circle around us. Their eyes flared brighter, the light inside them shifting like storm clouds, and the hum became something more, a rhythm, a heartbeat that wasn't mine, but beat in perfect sync with my own. The voice came again, louder now, reverberating in my skull. You will walk in both worlds. You will open where others cannot. You will bring us through. I shook my head, but the movement felt weak, unconvincing even to myself. The ground beneath us shifted, tilting upward, and suddenly we were falling, not down, but forward, as though the space ahead had opened into a drop. I hit the floor of my kitchen, hard. The table rattled, a chair toppled over. The morning light streamed weakly through the window, but it didn't feel like morning. Elias was standing by the counter, holding a cup of tea. They said that was enough for now, he murmured. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. My hands shook as I pulled myself into a chair. Elias, what happens next? He set the cup in front of me, steam curling in the air. Next, he said, they start using you. The hum pulsed once, deep and certain, as if agreeing. And somewhere in the distance, though whether it was in my mind or the real world, I couldn't tell, I heard the faint, deliberate sound of knocking. The knocking didn't stop. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't loud. It was measured. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more, like an unspoken code that was meant only for me. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The front door, the walls, the floor beneath my feet. Each sound sent a faint vibration through the wood of the chair I sat on, up into my bones. Elias stood perfectly still, watching me over the rim of his teacup. His expression was calm, almost bored, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. "They're asking to come in," he said. My throat tightened. "They're already in." He shook his head slowly. "Not fully. Not yet." The knocking shifted, growing softer, almost polite, and that somehow terrified me more than if it had been pounding. I could feel the rhythm burrowing under my skin, sinking with the hum in my chest. My hands began to tremble. "Elias," I whispered, "what happens if I let them?" He took a sip of tea, set the cup down without looking away from me. "Then you'll understand everything. But you can't go back." The pause after his words felt like a chasm. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the silence pressed in so hard that my ears rang. Then, without warning, the kitchen window fogged over, as though an icy breath had swept across it from the outside. Words began to form in the condensation, each letter long and deliberate. Time to open. I pushed back from the table, the legs of my chair scraping harshly against the floor. "No," I said aloud, as if saying it would make it true. Elias tilted his head, his dark eyes unreadable. "They're not asking you, Grandma. They're telling you." The lights flickered. The hum inside me surged so violently that I felt my heartbeat stumble, skip, then catch again in perfect rhythm with it. My breath quickened, and I realized the air in the room had grown thick, almost liquid, like breathing through cloth soaked in cold water. Somewhere deep in the house, a door creaked open. I turned toward the sound, slow, reluctant, and saw the basement door yawning wide, the darkness beyond it so dense it seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. The first shape emerged before I could move. It was one of them, but smaller than the towering figures I'd seen in the void, no more than a head taller than Elias. Its form was still wrong, too thin in some places, too heavy in others, and its movements were deliberate, each step landing in perfect silence. Its eyes locked on me, and though its face held no mouth, I felt it speak inside my head. "We are ready." I stumbled backward until my hip hit the counter. "Ready for what?" My voice cracked on the last word. Elias answered for it. "For you to start." The hum expanded, filling the room until every surface seemed to vibrate. The cups rattled in the cupboards. A hairline crack crawled along the kitchen wall, thin dust falling in its wake. I realized, with a strange detachment, that the sound wasn't just in my ears. It was in the structure of the house itself, shaking it from the inside out. The smaller figure stepped closer, and as it did, shadows bled from its form, stretching out like tendrils across the tile toward my feet. The air temperature dropped so sharply that my breath came out in pale clouds. I wanted to run, to scream, to shove past Elias and bolt for the door. But my body wouldn't obey. My legs felt heavy, rooted. The shadows reached my shoes, slid up over them, and then crept across my ankles like water soaking into fabric. 1,000 images slammed into my head all at once. Places I'd never been, faces I didn't know, events I couldn't possibly remember. But they weren't chaotic. They were. A map. A sequence. Somewhere in the storm of visions, I saw my own street, my own house, my neighbors' faces, each one marked by something. A faint shadow curled at the corner of their mouths, or their pupils just a shade too dark. And I understood, with bone-deep certainty, that they weren't just showing me the future. They were showing me their plan. "You will open for us here," the voice said, clear and cold inside my skull. "Then others will open elsewhere." I gasped, shaking my head. No, I won't." Elias stepped forward and took my hand. His small fingers were warm, almost human, but the hum spiked at his touch until spots danced in my vision. "You already are, Grandma," he said softly. And then I realized something that froze my blood. The knocking hadn't stopped. It had simply gone quiet, and now it was coming from inside. From the walls, from the floor, from the spaces between my thoughts. I tried to pull my hand away, but Elias's grip tightened, impossibly strong for a child. The smaller figure loomed closer until its eyes filled my vision, and in them I saw a reflection that wasn't my own. It was me, but changed, eyes darker, skin paler, a faint constant smile fixed to my face. The hum roared, the house shuddered, and then the walls began to split. The sound of the wall splitting wasn't like wood cracking or plaster breaking. It was deeper, wetter, like something old and long buried, tearing itself free. The seams spread in jagged lines, not just along the walls, but across the ceiling, the floor, even the corners where shadow pooled thickest. Fine dust rained down, carrying with it a smell that was both sweet and rotten, a scent that made the back of my throat tighten. The light in the kitchen dimmed, not all at once, but as though something was slowly drinking it in, swallowing it until only a dull gray glow remained. My eyes darted from crack to crack, but they weren't empty. The darkness inside them moved. I could hear it moving. Elias hadn't let go of my hand. His grip was steady, firm, almost comforting if not for the impossible strength behind it. His expression was calm, his breathing slow, as if what was happening around us was nothing more than the turning of a page in a book he had read before. The smaller figure, the one that had stepped from the basement, shifted. Its form loosened at the edges, the blackness trailing from it like smoke in water. The tendrils on the floor reached the nearest crack in the wall and sank into it. The moment they touched, the humming inside me swelled, and from the crack 2 pale hands emerged. Human in shape, but too long in the fingers. Their skin stretched thin over knobby joints. I staggered back until the counter dug into my spine, but there was nowhere to go. Every surface seemed alive now, every inch of the house splitting open in slow, deliberate rhythm. From the crack to my left, an eye appeared. Just one, lidless, the size of a fist. It rolled slightly, the pupil dilating as it fixed on me. From another fissure near the ceiling, a mouth pushed through, wide, lipless, the gums pale gray, teeth small and uniform like those of a child. They were coming through. "They've waited so long," Elias said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The bridge was only the beginning. You are the path." I shook my head, my voice breaking. I didn't... The mouth on the wall opened, and a voice poured out of it. My own voice, but lower, hollowed. "We chose you before you knew the word choice." The temperature dropped again, and my breath hung in the air. My legs were numb from the cold, and yet sweat ran down my spine. The hum in my chest was no longer a separate sound. It was my heartbeat now. It dictated the rhythm. The smaller figure moved to the center of the kitchen, its tendrils retracting as the cracks widened into yawning gaps. Shapes pushed through them one after another. Shoulders, arms, heads that stretched too tall. Torsos that twisted unnaturally as they emerged. Each one unfolded into the room, like something remembering its shape after too long in confinement. Their eyes, hundreds of them now, turned to me in unison. And then, as one, they smiled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't welcome. It was ownership. The sound that followed wasn't quite speech, but it pressed against my mind like fingers kneading clay. "You will walk. We will follow. You will speak. We will be heard." I tried to push back. I don't know how, but I tried. Thinking of my own name, my own memories, the faces of my children, anything that was mine. But the harder I thought, the more those images warped. My children's faces shifted into blank ovals. My memories flickered and were replaced by visions of places I'd never been, people I'd never met. Elias leaned closer, his lips near my ear. "Stop fighting. It only makes it worse." The first of the figures stepped fully free of the wall. It towered above me, its limbs bending like branches in a storm. Its skin shimmered faintly, and when it moved, it didn't displace air. It displaced space, the room bending subtly around it. It knelt, bringing its head level with mine. In its eyes, I saw not reflection, but a vast black horizon under a sky crowded with shifting stars. The hum surged, and something inside me, something deep and unwilling, broke. I felt them enter. It wasn't like possession, not in the way I'd imagined from stories. There was no sudden blackout, no loss of consciousness. I was still there, but so were they. My thoughts overlapped with others. My movements felt guided by unseen hands. My breath no longer entirely mine. The cracks in the wall stopped growing. The figures that had emerged stood still, watching, as though waiting for confirmation. The kneeling one reached out and touched my chest with a single long finger. The hum stopped. The silence was crushing. And then, in that silence, every figure in the room, every shape that had come through, every shadow that lingered in the cracks, spoke as one inside my head. "The door is open." Elias stepped in front of me, looking up at the towering figure. "What now?" he asked. The voice replied, still within me and all around me at once. "Now," she begins. And as they all turned toward the front door, I realized, with bone-deep certainty, that whatever they were about to make me do, the world outside would never be the same. They moved toward the front door in perfect unison, every step so precise it felt rehearsed. The floor didn't creak beneath them. It breathed, the boards flexing in tiny ripples as if welcoming their weight. I was still standing, but not because I chose to. Something was holding me upright, moving my body with the slow certainty of a sleepwalker. Elias glanced over his shoulder at me. His eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them, pupils so wide they swallowed all color. "Don't look away," he said softly. "If you do, you'll miss it." The largest of the figures reached the door first. It didn't open it in any normal way. It simply placed its elongated hand against the wood, and the hinges groaned as the entire frame seemed to melt, the wood fibers unraveling into strands of black. Beyond it, there was no street, no yard. There was only more blackness. It wasn't the same void I had stepped into in the basement. This was alive. It moved like an ocean seen from beneath, endless waves folding and curling over themselves, and from within it, countless pale shapes drifted forward. They weren't solid yet, but each step they took toward the threshold gave them form. Limbs knitting together, eyes solidifying in their sockets, mouths pulling wide as if learning to speak for the first time. The cold that spilled in from that space wasn't physical. It was the cold of recognition, the kind that grips you when you finally meet the thing that's been watching you your entire life. Elias stepped into that threshold as casually as if he were crossing into another room. "They've been waiting to come through here," he said. "Through you." My voice came out in a whisper, but I didn't recognize the tone. "Why me?" The smaller figure, the first one that had emerged from the basement, turned its head toward me. "Because you hear." Those words landed in my mind with the weight of a sentence already carried out. I felt my chest tighten, the hum inside me now a deep, resonant throb that seemed to match the pulse of the blackness beyond the door. The first of the pale shapes crossed the threshold. It was featureless except for its eyes, human, disturbingly human, and when it passed me, I felt something brush against the inside of my skull. Not a thought exactly, but a presence, marking me like a scent. One by one, more of them stepped through. The room filled with them, their forms shifting subtly as they took in the space, as if testing the air, the walls, the size of the ceiling. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Elias moved among them like a conductor, his small hands gesturing in ways I didn't understand, each motion causing them to adjust their positions, lining themselves in perfect, silent formation. When he finally stopped, they all turned to face me. The largest figure stepped forward again, placing its hand once more against my chest. Its touch didn't press, it pulled. The hum swelled to the point of pain, and I felt something inside me stretching, thinning, like a thread being drawn out. "We will speak through you," the voice said. Not aloud, but inside, deep enough that it seemed to echo in my bones. I wanted to scream, but my mouth didn't move. My lips curved upward instead, forming that same cold, fixed smile I'd seen in Elias's drawing. More shapes continued to pour through the doorway, but the room never grew crowded. The space seemed to shift for them, bending to hold as many as needed. I realized then that the walls weren't closing in earlier. They were learning to open. And still, I could feel more waiting beyond. Elias came to stand beside me, his small fingers brushing against mine. "When the last one comes through," he whispered, "it begins." "What begins?" He smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the blackness still spilling forward. "The change." I could feel it already. A slow rewriting in the way my body stood, the rhythm of my breathing, the thoughts flickering through my head. They weren't replacing me. They were adding to me. Somewhere deep in the house, the knocking started again. Not from outside, not from the walls, from inside me. The knocking inside me grew louder, echoing in places my body shouldn't have sound. It wasn't in my chest, not exactly. It was deeper, as though it came from the hollow spaces between my bones, from the marrow itself. Every beat was answered by the hum, the two merging until I couldn't tell which one belonged to me anymore. The blackness beyond the open doorway churned faster, shapes pressing against it from the other side, their outlines warping as if they couldn't decide on a final form. They were eager now. I could feel it. The air thickened, every breath heavy and damp, the kind of air that clung to you like a second skin. Elias never looked away from the void. "The last one is almost here," he said. "When they step through, the door will close, but you'll still carry it." I didn't want to carry anything. I wanted it out. But when I tried to imagine being without the hum, the knocking, the presence, there was nothing. Just an empty space so vast it scared me more than what was in me now. The largest figure turned to me, its head tilting in that unnatural, deliberate way. "Hold still," the voice said, though I hadn't moved. My body obeyed instantly, locking in place. The last shape came forward. It was smaller than the others, almost human in height, but its skin was smooth and white, featureless except for a thin vertical slit where its face should have been. As it approached, the slit began to open, slowly, wetly, revealing not teeth, but an endless darkness that pulled at the air like a deep pit. When it crossed the threshold, the hum inside me reached a pitch so high it became silence. The knocking stopped. Every figure in the room froze, their eyes fixed on me. The smallest one stepped close enough that its shadow merged with mine. The darkness of its face slit reached forward and entered me. It wasn't like a possession or an attack. It was a swallowing. My vision went black at the edges, collapsing inward until the only thing I could see was Elias's face, calm and certain. "They're all in now," he said softly. "You can feel it, can't you?" I could. Every movement in the room, every shift in the air, every thought that wasn't mine. I could feel them all at once, like threads knotted together inside my head. I was still me, but I was also them. The doorway behind the figures began to collapse, folding inward until it was gone. In its place was just my front wall again, the paint and wood perfectly untouched, as if nothing had happened. But the house was different now. Bigger somehow, deeper. The largest figure stepped forward one last time, placing its long, cold fingers over my heart. "The door's closed," it said. "You are the door now." One by one, the figures began to dissolve into the air, their shapes bleeding into shadow until the room was empty again. The only sound was my breathing, slow, even, perfectly in time with the hum inside me. Elias turned toward the hallway. "It'll start small," he said. "They'll speak through you when they need to. You'll see them even when others don't. And when it's time." He glanced back at me, smiling faintly. "You'll open again." I stood there long after he left the room, staring at the place where the blackness had been. The morning light was beginning to creep through the curtains, touching the walls, the table, my hands. But the light didn't make me feel safe, because when I looked at the shadow, my body cast on the floor, I saw it move. Not with me, ahead of me, leading me, waiting for me to follow.